Hello, welcome everyone. I see we've got folks joining us. I'll just give everybody another couple of seconds for you guys to come up and join us. So hello, good afternoon, good morning to some of you. My name is Julie Davis. I am the Director of Marketing with A Church Consulting. Welcome. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items. First, everyone is on mute, but we absolutely want questions. Please use the Q&A box and the chat box, and we will be sure to get to those questions. Also, this is being recorded, and so as such, I will be sharing the recording with everyone in a follow-up email. So please be sure to check your email later today for this recording, as well as other great information. One thing I do ask as well is if you guys could take less than 3 minutes to fill out a very brief survey letting you know what your thoughts are, what you liked, what you didn't like, what we could do better. So we do read those and we take those to heart. So that would be really great for us. Also, before I get started on the introductions, I do want to let everyone know that the report for the State of Association Workplaces Post-Pandemic Survey Report is out. So that is something that is available. And I'll have a link also in that follow-up email if you're interested on how to get a copy of that. So without further ado, I would like to now introduce our esteemed panel here. I am going to turn it over to John Cleese. John, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. That report name is a mouthful. Appreciate it. Good one, though. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Again, my name is John Cleese, and I'm the Director of Remote Workforce Consulting here at A Church. And for those of you that are not familiar with us and the work that we do, we really help organizations reimagine the way that people are working. And that's certainly true today. After the pandemic, a lot of us are either fully remote or we're part-time remote. And that really starts to require a different way of imagining what the workforce needs to be, how employees are engaged, keeping the culture that you want. So all those new soup to nuts things that we have to do in our new way of working, we help organizations move forward with that. And in addition to that, we are super excited today that we've got Johnny Clayton and Adam Hofstetter here from Fuse Search. And Johnny, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. As he said, Johnny Clayton. I'm one of the co-founders and chief marketing officer here at Fuse Search, and I'm very happy to be here.
Hey everybody, nice to meet you all, and thanks so much for attending today. I'm Adam Hofstetter, I run Fuse, and at Fuse, we aggregate content and create content visualizations from that aggregated content. So you have system information, content, data stored in system A, system B, system C. Fuse connects to each one of those content sources and aggregates it, and then comes up with some sort of visualization. It could be a search interface, a listing of data, something like that. And we can't wait to show you some of the cool stuff that's being done and ways that you can do your jobs more efficiently. Thanks for having us, John.
You are welcome, and thank you, Adam. We are very excited to talk about that. So let's go over the agenda a little bit. First, we're going to talk about what does it mean to have a meaningful meeting mindset. To some of you, that may mean no meetings, but that's probably not going to happen. But we do need to try to figure out a way, especially with employees being on site and off site, how can we make our meetings better, right? And so some of that is really changing our mindsets when we think about meetings and sort of our initial impulse to always call one. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then Adam and Johnny are going to talk about how AI can really help you bring some of this data together. So how do I get the information that I need to have a more meaningful meeting, right? So I want to go more in depth. I want to have better meetings and not wasting people's time. So they're going to talk about that. And really how AI can help reduce some of the meetings. And I think we had said meeting fatigue as part of the promo for this webinar. And let's face it, a lot of us do. We are in meetings at the top of the hour, every hour for 6 to 8 hours a day for some of us, not really allowing us to have much time for creative or thoughtful work. And so what we want to do is talk about how AI can help the meetings that we do have be more meaningful and also sort of free up that time. And then we'll leave plenty of time for you to have questions. And I should say this, and Julie, maybe you already did, but if you have questions and you want to put them in the chat, please do so while we go through the seminar. So
We are glad that everyone came to this meeting today.
yes, we are, exactly. And so what would a meeting be out if we didn't start with a poll? So we want to start with a poll, and we want to ask you, how meaningful are the meetings that you have right now? Are they always insightful? So insightful, in fact, you want to have them on Saturdays and Sundays. Could they be shorter? But at least you'll learn some stuff. And then are they sort of WOT, just a big waste of time that you could have gotten this information from elsewhere? So let's see what you got there. Oh, I like that on the screen already. I see that. Some are insightful, we see. I won't leave the audience, so I'll just be quiet while they vote.
Okay, just a couple more seconds, and then I think we're going to end the poll.
I see
Somebody
your
wrote-
comment there.
Yeah,
Barbara. Yeah.
we agree, right? It's hard. And it can be all three. We should have had, we'll know that for next time. It's all three, right? Sometimes insightful, sometimes short or whatever. So, and Julie, it looks like your prediction early on was correct. So, all right.
right.
Are we good? We're going to close the poll. So, and I'm sorry, everybody can see what I can see, right? Julie, on the screen, the poll one?
They should have. Did everyone hopefully saw? I'll share the results again.
Yeah, perfect. Intent and purpose. I like that. Thank you, Christy. All right. So it looks like by 69% could be shorter, but at least I learned stuff. 17% of you think it's insightful, and 14% say it's a total waste of time. Some are truly WOT. I think we need to enter that new acronym in there, but
Hashtag
try not to
WOT.
be-
Yeah,
Exactly,
hashtag WOT in
exactly,
the house.
Exactly. So it seems to me, I agree. And I think, I don't know, it was Adam when you were talking about the seminar early on, that it's really like 30 minutes of good stuff, and then we're just kind of repeating. And so I think that sort of goes with what people are saying here, that they could be shorter, but at least I learned some stuff. So that being said, one of the things when we were preparing to talk to you all about this is really when we get ourselves into a more meaningful mindset is also about the information that I need for the meeting, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but sometimes maybe you could find the information, you wouldn't have to have a meeting at all. But here's a really interesting survey from Interact Source. Almost 20% of your time, or 1 day a week of employees, is actually spent looking for information. So think about that. Every Friday, you could take Friday off if you could actually find the information a little bit easier if you weren't wasting your time. And one of the things that we have noticed in the work that we do with clients is nobody was feeling before the pandemic that their meeting time was really good, that they had sort of mastered meetings, and then all of a sudden they exploded. What we have found is that meetings were really difficult to manage in our workload even before the pandemic. And that just got worse when we went home, right? Because the 15-minute flyby conversation or less, 5-minute conversation in the hallway now turned into a 20 or 30-minute Zoom call because you weren't able to see that person anymore. So all of that interaction that used to happen spontaneous, we had to plan. And so that was in addition to already what was sort of an overburdened meeting schedule. So it's only gotten worse. I'd be interested to see what this survey would look like now if we did it now with our sort of our hybrid situations that we're in, if it would in fact still be the same. All right, so next slide, Julie. Thank you. Perfect.
And I see Renee's comment,
What'd
John.
she say?
Well, she said she thinks meetings have become more efficient using Zoom, and yeah, that does happen sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, you know what? That's a good point, because I think that people are hopefully a little bit more conscious of people's time, but I agree with that. And also the other thing that's interesting is people have said that meetings and Zoom in general have made personal interactions actually strengthen their personal relationships with their staff, right? Because, like for now you're in my office and, people can share what they're doing at their home or look what you're eating for lunch. So that's interesting. So yeah, more direct and hopefully got more efficient and also a little bit more personalized. So
And we're going to talk about more
I just
about
noticed
that.
you can see my son's BB-8 Lego,
There you go.
right here.
So you know a little bit about Julie now.
There you
And
go.
Exactly.
Renee,
Yes.
we are going to talk a little bit later too about one kind of hidden cool thing about having these remote meetings is you can record them. Like we're recording this webinar,
Yes.
and then you can do stuff with that recording. So stay tuned.
Yes, no, I love that. I love that. Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about this. So for meaningful meetings, and also I should mention at the end or after this webinar, when Julie sends out a follow-up email, we actually have a really cool flow chart that we'll give you that you can use to figure out and decide whether or not you should have a meeting at all. And if you do have a meeting, sort of what kind of meeting and channel should it be in? But one of the things, again, as I said earlier, our first instinct is always, I'm going to call a meeting, right? So what we start out with is to think about what information do I need in the first place that I need to either receive from people to help me make a decision, or what is the information that I need to impart out to the group, right? So that's the first thing. Making sure that you really understand what the purpose of the meeting is. And I think somebody wrote that in the chat early on. What is the purpose? Why do I need to call this meeting in the first place? And not just really giving that a flyby cursory review, but really thinking deeply about it before you call that meeting, if you're the person, in fact, that's going to call that meeting. And then understanding what is the outcome, right? What's the outcome that you hope to get from that meeting, right? And then a flow chart, you'll see, and some of that stuff is with the outcome. Do I actually even need a meeting to get to that outcome? But again, what's my purpose? What's the outcome? And then over to the left, and can I find the information myself first, or do I really need to have a meeting with that? And I'll tell you, in the work that we do, in the surveys that we do, most people will tell us that sort of what this poll said was, my meetings could be shorter. A lot of them are that they're incredibly duplicitous. This is their, people have 2 or 3 meetings in a week of the same subject, right? Because nobody knows that the other meetings happen. Nothing's posted anywhere. People can't find the information, so they create another meeting about it. And then that sort of that far one to the right is, what information do I need as a host that's going to do the meeting, or the participant, like to make sure that that meeting is more efficient? And I think that we have probably relied too much on the meeting as being the place that we learn everything that we need to learn. And in fact, what we really need to do is a mind shift to a lot more pre-work before you ever take up people's precious live time, right? And that gets really true when you've got people scattered either in different time zones, if you've gone international. Sometimes there just isn't the overlap of available time, especially in a distributed workforce, for everybody to meet live. So again, that means shorter meetings, more efficient meetings, and different ways of imparting that information. And again, making sure that participants are ready, that they're ready when they actually show up for that meeting. Adam, anything to add on that before, we went?
Well, I think, yeah, John, I think here what, if I may, one of the takeaways from our session will be, as you're going through this process, and John and Julie are going to share that really helpful checklist later with you all. But yeah, you may determine we don't even need to have this meeting because I found some information here that's going to help me solve my question and the meeting's purpose. So we were joking earlier that, oh, I'm preparing for this meeting. Well, no, you're actually preparing to prepare for the meeting. And during that preparing to prepare, you may determine we don't even need to have this thing. Or if you do, we can narrow it down and just talk about this one thing because these other 2 things have already been addressed elsewhere. And we'll talk about that more later, John.
Yeah, perfect. No, good points. Okay, Julie, perfect. So one of the questions that we always ask first, and you'll see in the flow chart, is to think about the type of meeting that it is. And then once you determine the type of meeting that it is or that you'd like to have, then sort of figuring out whether it needs to be live in the first place. So those top 3 above that line, something that's urgent, there's a fire, I don't mean a literal fire, but I mean a firestorm of something happened in your organization or a sensitive matter. Obviously, sometimes those meetings need to be called. These may not be the best places to be doing it in writing or over a video call, but a video call certainly if it can't be live, but it doesn't really lend itself to being in writing or posted. You might have project kickoffs that you've been working back and forth a lot, either with emails or on different types of chat. And you know what? It's really not getting you anywhere. And that could be for lots of conversations where you sort of hit that stalemate going back and forth. So sure, then you probably need to call a live meeting. And this last one, decision-making, this is where we really work with a number of our organizations that if you have too many meetings and you're spending too much time in the meetings, again, meetings shouldn't be the first place that you learn about the information that you need to make a decision on. There needs to be more pre-work. So the idea is that behavioral changes, I go to the meetings to make decisions. It's not to learn all the information. So the more pre-work we can do, the more information we can get at that before the meeting, the faster and better and more efficient and more meaningful, hopefully, your meetings will become. I think I've said meeting 1,000 times already, and we're only on slide 7. So, all right. So the next one.
I think we're not doing the drinking game, right? The
yeah,
shot every time he says a
exactly.
meeting.
I would have lost the whole
Out.
audience. Exactly. They'd be
It's not
gone.
Friday yet.
No,
Not yet, almost.
not 5. Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but not here yet anyway.
Exactly, not here in Michigan. So underneath that line, status updates, this for us is a real low-hanging fruit. Status meetings should not be wasted with people's precious lifetime, because that can really be taking place either in a project management software, some sort of task management software. It can be somewhere else where people can tap in. And I'm not talking about like live monitoring that they're online, but finding out the status of where they are in their tasks or their projects. That does not have to be a live meeting. So that really is an easy place to start to find some more time. The second one after that, brainstorming and collaboration. Some people probably say, oh, brainstorming, we definitely need to come back in the office for brainstorming. Well, yes and no. I think that one thing we have learned in this pandemic is that there's a whole other half of the population that actually is a little bit more introverted, doesn't necessarily think on the fly the best. Their optimal way to think about and provide thoughtful response isn't to be in a big meeting where they're called upon and everybody's throwing out ideas. They need more time to process, right? And so if some of your brainstorming and sort of your collaboration is done online, so I either post in the wiki or somewhere else in some sort of shared document, the information you're trying to get, or you're trying to get some ideas around a project or something, it's okay for people to give their written responses. And for some people, that's how you're going to get the best out of them. It is not to pull everybody in a room and say, hey, for 25 or 30 minutes, we're going to go around the room and everybody give us your best shot. Lots of people don't like to work that way. And I think we really learned that through the pandemic. In some ways, offices are really set up for that other outward personality, that A type of person. But for lots of other people that need more focused, thoughtful time, brainstorming and collaboration is a great thing to do online. And you have a written record of it. And we'll see in a moment why that's super important when we're talking to Adam. But getting that written down is also a great way to see the evolution of ideas and sort of leave that track record. And that goes the same thing with consensus building. You can already start to build consensus prior to ever coming into a meeting in terms of what you're trying to decide about. You don't need to do that live in a meeting. And again, I go back to the other half of the population that doesn't necessarily like to work that way, right? They want thoughtful give back and forth. They want to ask questions. Maybe they're a little bit more private. And then you can sort of bring people along to consensus, but it doesn't always have to happen live and in the moment. All right, so what are some of the components of what we believe to be sort of more meaningful meetings? Number one at the top, I think the right participants. We hear over and over again people that say, I don't know why I was in the meeting, or I don't know why that person was in the meeting, and or I only needed to be in the meeting to say one thing for 1 minute, but I had to sit there for an hour, right? So there's lots of different ways to deal with that. But overall, at the larger level, just making sure that you have the right participants in the meeting, right? Setting an agenda. We always say that we do, but most people don't still when we talk to groups, is make sure that the agenda is out and that people understand their participants again, because the participants need to be ready. What are the outcomes that you are looking for as the host from that meeting, right? I'm going to jump over to the left to the orange, and thank goodness, Julie, you put these in color. So communicating in the right channels, right? Can the meeting be asynchronous? Should it be asynchronous, right? Maybe you've got different postings that you need people to look at. Well, that lends, if you have visuals or PowerPoints or other information that they need to include or that they need to review before they get to the meeting, sometimes an asynchronous back and forth where they've got a directory of all that information is better. And then that bottom light blue, and this is very critical. And the way that I like to think about this is think about your board meetings. If you published minutes from all of the major meetings that you have, right? Yes, that takes more time, no doubt about it. You know, of all the actions that were taken, the discussion and the things that you sort of put in a parking lot, imagine how easy that would become for you to onboard new people, to understand how you arrived at that decision, because there's a written record of that. And again, getting rid of the duplicitous meetings because nobody was aware that that other meeting had actually happened before, right? So that's again, another mind shift about writing it down, taking the notes, posting it, making sure people are aware that should be aware, right, that that meeting happened, and making sure again that you get the right participants in the room. And then the final one, which we want to really get into today, sort of the biggest element that we want to talk about is really accurate information to make these decisions when you get into the meeting. So if the better the information I have, whether historic or current or whatever it is, the better we can make these decisions. And Adam, this is where I'm super excited to start talking to you about AI and how AI can really help us get at some of this information that we can talk about. And oh, look, you've got some scenarios that I think you're going to talk about.
Oh, amazing how that worked out like that.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, you know, this exciting stuff to talk about. And first of all, I love the chat that's happening right now because folks have different thoughts, you know, real world examples, and we all learn from each other so well. And some of the things that John was saying really resonated with folks. And I just think that's so nice for everyone to be sharing in the chat what their own real world experiences are, because we've all attended webinars like this before, and sometimes they can get a little pie in the sky. And I know when the term AI is thrown around, it can seem pie in the sky-ish. And if we're doing our jobs right today, Johnny and I, it's bringing it down to a level that it's understandable. And actually, it's not too pie in the sky. It's not a silver bullet. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. There's still some good old-fashioned elbow grease that needs to be put into it to make this stuff all work. But there are a lot of possibilities here for organizations, especially as we've pivoted to for some of you, a hybrid work environment, and to some others, a completely remote environment, as I believe our two companies are, Fuse and A Church, being 100% remote. So these are some possible, you know, things we're talking about that maybe would trigger a meeting occurring. You know, a member is reporting a problem with the website. You know, I can't get to some information I want, and it's frustrating. And this happened before. And, you know, a staff turnover. This is more of the second box there is more of an internal issue. You know, Jack used to manage those things, but Jack doesn't work here anymore. And now we're in trouble because we don't know how to do this at all. And Jack's not available anymore. He moved to Tahiti, and they have bad internet access. And then there's always that, you know, you get the board member calling and they're driving you crazy. They say, I can't find anything. I'm looking for this thing. And of course it's there, but you know where to go to get to it, the 6 clicks that it takes to get to it, but they can't find it. And so stick with me here, but the analogy I'm thinking of is, and John mentioned it, history. You know, history tends to repeat itself. So, you know, maybe you can relate to this, not these 3 specific cases, but you may be able to think of ones that are like it that you've had. And some of these are very pedestrian. It's not like trying to solve some huge complex problem. Some of them are just basic, simple things. But as they're served to you on a plate, you have to decide, do we need to have a meeting about this? Do we have to have a conversation? Is this going to trigger, what are ways that we could solve this? As you remember that graphic that John was showing earlier with the thought bubbles, you know, as you're thinking those things, do you need to dig into these? And do we need to even get to the point where we're having a meeting? And I'm thinking about, chances are, for many of these issues that you're faced with at your organization, something like it has happened before. That's the point I'm looking to make. And analogy I made earlier was, for example, the pandemic. And this isn't the first time for many of us. It's the first time we've faced something like this. It feels new, but guess what? It's actually not new. Our history is filled with pandemics and epidemics. You know, even just 70 years ago was the polio epidemic. And that's, you know, that was a scary thing at that time. My grandfather-in-law had polio, and it's awful. And there were children afflicted with this. And again, people panicked and there was vaccines and people questioning the vaccines. And we've been through this before, people. And it's the same thing in our organizations. We have these problems that confront us and we think, oh man, what are we going to do? You just got to go back and look. And so using this example here where, hey, the member says they can't find these recordings. What if, Julie and John, what if there was a magical way we could see if, hey, has this come up before? And what was the answer? And what Fuse proposes is this concept, is that you have a knowledge base right under your nose. You didn't even know it. So all of you probably use software in the software business. We use knowledge, the term knowledge base. It's typically kind of like a big old Q&A. How do I hook this up? How does this work? What are my options, for this? But you have the same thing in your organization. You have a big old knowledge base and it's sitting right there. And it's not just one system. And that's the catch. A knowledge base doesn't have to be limited to just one thing. It can be a bunch of things. Your AMS, raise your virtual hand if you have an AMS. Your AMS can be a knowledge base. Your chat software, maybe you're using Teams or Slack, can be a knowledge base. We were talking about this earlier. You may even have a kind of like a member support email address. Those messages that come in where members are asking questions or have problems. That's a knowledge base. There is good data in there that you want to tap into. And as you're going through this process with one of those scenarios, you're confronted with one of those scenarios, and then you're going through the thought bubble process, that graphic that Julie and John had up. Think about, hey, does this same problem exist somewhere in our knowledge base? That's the premise of our, at least our portion of the discussion today.
Adam, you may want to also think about too, that how often meetings get called and you start scrambling around looking for this information and you realize, well, the question was asked in email. And then the conversation, it was answered in Slack. And then it was stored in SharePoint. And then it was presented in PowerPoint. And so when you're thinking across all of those, this is a typical everyday occurrence. It's nothing special. And so that's pretty much what everybody on this call right now is looking at every day when they try to access and find information for a meeting or a report or for anything to help them do their job.
Yeah, well, and Johnny, what I think is interesting about that too, when you think about it, is like, yeah, I've got a file, I post a document, how many people actually set the table or write the briefing, or what was the setting, or what's the context for what this final document is? And when you think about knowledge base, and we were talking about earlier, like, I don't think people would think, we would say Slack is a communication channel, but if you think about it, all that knowledge that got spilled out, all of that, like for instance, our organization, we use Slack a lot, but there may be all that Slack conversation ended up resulting in a document. All that conversation is not attached to that document anywhere. So there's really no context of the back and forth that went through for somebody reading that document that says, well, how did they think about this? Or how did they arrive at that conclusion? Well, all of that other knowledge, like you said, exists somewhere else, right? In conversation somewhere.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, and being able to tap into that is, it could be a game changer. And it's not, again, this isn't a silver bullet. It's not as if, hey, if you do this, you're not going to have meetings anymore. Congratulations. Even if there's a 10% or a 20%, something very modest difference where, we were able to eliminate, 8% of meetings, because we went through this process and determined actually this wasn't necessary. We were able to go back and look at our history and answer some of these questions and be able to help our users. And even those meetings that proceed, because not all meetings are bad, we're having one right now. Even those meetings that proceed, they're more meaningful, which of course is the entire premise of this webinar, is to make it really all the juicy good bits. When we did the survey before, most people had said that, there's some good tidbits in there. About 70% of you, right, had said, if the meeting is this long, there's something good here. Let's just skip to that part. And, Renee had talked about, some of the benefits of Zoom, and it can be more efficient. And we're going to show you in a minute about something you could do with those recordings. Because imagine if one of these systems held recordings of those meetings. So, and it could even be before your time. Let's say you're a new executive director. You just came on the job. The other one had been there a quadrillion years and they just retired. But guess what? They had the same problem confronted them, and they had a meeting about it. And what if it was post-pandemic time and there was a recording of that meeting and it was sitting here in the knowledge base, air quotes, knowledge base, because it could be just someone uploaded it to Slack, or it could be sitting like on your network in a storage drive. What if you could tap into it? And that's the premise of the next slide, which is come up with these. Oh,
Yeah,
I forgot that we have another poll.
Yeah, we have a poll.
Ding, 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 ding. It's poll
yeah,
time,
no worries.
everybody.
I know, we've polled everywhere. So now that we exposed you a little bit more, again, for me, it was like pivoting to think about Slack as a knowledge base, but any place in your organization where conversations are happening, where information's exchanged or facts may be. So our poll to you question is, how many systems contain knowledge about your organization? So 1 to 4 systems, 5 to 8, 9 or more. And is it a secret as to where or how many sort of systems that you have that might contain some knowledge? So you take a second to look at that and tell us, expanding your idea of what a knowledge system means, not just our AMS or Teams or whatever. How many do you have in your organization?
That last option for it's a secret, it actually comes from a real case with a client. They could only declare publicly that they had 5 systems, but they knew for a fact that there were 15 to 20 rogue databases circling around the organization, but they couldn't talk about it.
Right. Well, God forbid we ever got rid of a legacy system. That just doesn't work, John. You got to keep that information forever, right? On multiple systems. So
sacred cows.
Julie, I can't see the results. So
well, nothing's being posted. I feel like, I wonder if there's a problem with the
let's see,
whole app. It's not, oh shoot. That's not what I wanted to do. Hold, please.
Yeah, I hear that. People saying no access to post, no poll showing up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I don't know why. I launched it the way they said.
No worries.
We'll just put it in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, put it in the chat. Go ahead. We'll pivot. Let's go put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat.
So we've got 9+. We got our first 9+. Wow. Okay, that's a lot. What else we got? 5 to 8, another 9+, 9+, 5 to 8s. A lot of those. Okay. So again, it's 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and 9+, and it's a secret for those of you wanted us to repeat that on that. So that is a lot of systems, right?
It's a lot.
Adam, I've lost my chat.
I'm here. I was muted there because I was typing.
Is that, we pretty much sum that up?
Yeah, I like that. And, and again, I think we're doing our jobs right here on the webinar. So even, Lori, I would challenge you, you're saying 1 to 4 systems. I wonder if maybe by the end of this webinar or, maybe tonight when you're going to bed, you're like, that's another knowledge-based system. Actually, I hadn't thought about that before. Like that could be another source of knowledge. And maybe that number would creep up even a little bit more.
If not, she needs to add another system.
That's right. It's time to sign up another vendor and get another system. So, okay, so how does this all work? And this is really about content aggregation. And the first step in this, we're going to get to the AI part, but the first step of it is accessing those systems and looking up in those systems. And by the way, some of this you can think of for many of you being member facing. So this could be information that you make available to your members, to the public, or even prospective members. But some of this can also be intranet kind of stuff, internal kind of stuff for the staff. And you'll have to decide some of those things. Sometimes that's kind of a gray area between what you would want the staff to be able to see and what you would want the members to be able to see. For example, in this case, you would maybe want your members to be able to see social media and Higher Logic and maybe the information from the event management system. But maybe there's other records that you would want to close hold that would just be accessed by your staff or by certain levels of staff based on their role within the organization. So like maybe the AMS and Salesforce, those are things that are proprietary, that are just for staff eyes only and not for members to be able to see. But you may ask the engine, hey, What were the June survey results? Or what was the board agenda? I'm writing September's board agenda. What was August's? And in a perfect world, and John had brought this up in one of our prep calls, in a perfect world, you're storing all this stuff. And you have a directory, board agendas, and everything goes in that directory. And you have another directory, survey results, and all the survey results are going in there. But there's some things that can get a little bit dicier to store, like new membership rates. Where's that document stored? And where do we put that? Is that in the accounting folder? Is that in the member engagement folder? Is it in a couple places? And yes, from a governance standpoint, in an ideal world, you wouldn't need AI and you wouldn't need to organize these systems because you'd have one knowledge base and all the data would be tagged and have a beautiful taxonomy associated with it. And it would be right there every single time, all set.
Isn't that what everybody has?
I think so, Johnny. Yeah, and we'd be out of business. In the real world, I think what happens is stuff stored everywhere. And there's this notion of, well, you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be storing your stuff everywhere. You should be more organized about it. Shame on you. And what we like to think is part of this webinar discussion is actually it's okay. It's okay for your content to live where your content lives. Some members maybe interact with it there. Certain staff may interact with it there. If your executive director really likes to store data in system A, we were actually talking about it this morning, weren't we, Julie, talking about Microsoft Teams versus Dropbox. And some stuff is stored in Dropbox, some stuff is stored in Teams, and this is why we have to use this system for that and this system for that. And in an ideal world, it would just be one system, but that's not how the real world works often. And that's okay. Store your stuff, keep your stuff wherever it needs to live, and go to it and find the content there. And there could be certain benefits to it. One that comes up a lot are member profiles. Higher Logic has its own set of member profiles. And your AMS, guess what? Has its own member profile. Here's the address of this member. Well, Higher Logic has the address of this member too. And here's the email address. Rinse, and repeat all the data fields. And it's no one approach is wrong. And Rebecca, I see your comment here. I think that's hopefully another takeaway for you from this webinar is, hey, this is okay. It's okay to have the information spread across all these systems. In fact, you could argue, and this is an entirely different webinar, but you could argue that's actually a benefit because these systems in theory, and some of you may disagree about some of your systems, how well they work, but in theory, they're best of breed. So this system is really good at this stuff. This other system is like this, our financial software is really good at managing all that data and those records. That's awesome. This other system we use, SharePoint, we love how it handles video content. Forgive me, I just made that up because SharePoint doesn't actually handle video great, but let's just say that did. And our chatbot, clearly that software is best of breed. It's our chat software, and that's how we interact with some members online. And that is really good at what it does. So why would we want to mix that up and do something different? And that's what we're proposing here, is that you don't really have to. You can actually get to all of that data from one spot after you aggregate it together in a search index.
Well, and I think what, I can tell you too, in the work that we're doing, especially with remote, because we said earlier, it's gotten harder for people that are in a distributed workforce to find, some of the information, or again, they're now disturbing people online or setting up a meeting to find that information. But, and some of you on the call may already been through this project, but organizing, especially going to a new system, right? So you get a new system, bringing that historical data, deciding what data we should have, what should we do. I mean, those can be year-plus long projects, if not longer, to try to get all of that into one place that's in it, And so, like you said, I think what's interesting about this, and I want to kind of ask you guys, like when you look at the future, and AI being this really great search tool, do you think that at some point sort of that all goes away? Like the idea like, oh, these files, and not that we're still not gonna have files, but do you think it'll eventually not matter anymore? Like what our file structure is, what my naming convention is, besides being able to be searchable, but do you see that as going away?
Yeah, not necessarily going away. There'll never be a substitute, John, for a subject matter expert who can look at a document and say, this is what this document's about. It's maybe not overtly clear from looking at the document that that's the theme of this document. There'll be no substitute for that. But yeah, it's going that way where instead of creating structured content like in folders, you're using tags, you're using taxonomy, you're using content classifications instead of, and I think you've probably seen this like in a blog, for example. At a blog, at its core, and this is a very successful foundational way to organize content, at its core, all blog posts are at the same level. You know, sometimes they're organized by date, but they're all at the same root level. How you distinguish them is you assign tags to them. You know, this article is about cybersecurity, and this other article is about engaging members, and you're tagging it. Hashtags, same idea. All tweets, and this is perhaps a poor example, but all tweets are at the same root level. You don't drag a tweet into the Iraq-Afghanistan war conflict folder. The way that you distinguish them is you add, forgive me, that was really dumb that I just did that. The hashtag symbol.
Yeah, well, it's almost like, if you think about it, it's like for those that, and many of us have been tangentially or done and been involved with website redevelopment, where you're putting in those keywords and things like that so people find you. In some ways, it's thinking that all of the stuff that we do has these keywords that end up becoming just searchable. Right?
Yeah.
So everything that we do becomes like when we create a website or documents that we want people to find.
That's right. I mean, and it certainly does help, you know, if the resources are there, if the governance is there, and you can do it in a disciplined and organized way, because sometimes what happens, and I'm sure no one on this call does this, but sometimes what happens, you have a taxonomy and there, you know, let's say there's 75 terms.
You know what, say what that is again. I'm sorry, taxonomy, just because
yeah, so taxonomy is when you have a piece of content and you have a list of topics and you assign one or more of those topics to that content item, and you say, this is what this content item is. Taxonomy can also be other metadata. It could be like, here's the author of this content, here's the date, here's the byline. Though those can be taxonomical items as well. But for our purposes today, we're talking about really topics and assigning topics to content. Yeah. And you know, that's a helpful thing if you can do it. But what happens sometimes is folks they add in 20 topics. This content is about all of these things, because it's mentioned once over here. Well, that's not really what it's about. And then it starts to work against you, because then you're starting to search the content and items are coming up that say, oh, this is about mobile workforce, but it's not. It was mentioned one time because it's in someone's title or something, but it's not what the content item is about at all. And so there is that discipline that you have to take. And so AI can actually help you with that too. If you go on to the next slide, Julie, we're talking about, you know, how do you AI?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I was chopping at the bit, Dessa. So super exciting. But so how do you literally get started with something like this? Like if somebody's thinking right now, oh man, I am ready to shelve the reorg project of all my directories and bring a new system of historical data. But hey, I love this idea that I can sort of search through and find it. Like, how do you actually get started with something like this? Like scope out that project.
And this is high level, and I'll share it. And please, if you have any questions, we'll definitely get to it later. But this is a good way to start, because one of the deep, dark secrets about AI, don't tell anybody, is you have to train it. And so,
right?
That's right, it has to learn. Okay. And particularly for groups, and some of you may be on the call, you may be with medical societies or associations, you may be in, you know, engineering, academia, where, you know, lots of acronyms, lots of scientific or medical terms. You know, there are AI engines, like we have one that is specifically for like medical libraries. And so it knows stuff, but it's never going to know stuff as well as you know the stuff. It's about 80% good out of the gate, but there's still going to be things that it's not going to handle well or properly, and you're going to be scratching your head about it. And one way you get around that and you make it better is by training it. So using these examples that I had up before, that we had up before, where, you know, for example, one of the queries was, you know, what are the June 2020 survey results? Well, we just focus on the survey results part. And then down the list here, cybersecurity audits, board agenda, not the August board agenda per se, but just board agenda generically. And then it's give me a bunch of sample, me being the AI engine, give the AI engine a bunch of known documents that fit into those categories and teach it. And so you can go through here and say, hey, AI engine, here's a bunch of documents that have to do with the board agenda and board agenda drafts and board meeting minutes and things of that nature. And the AI engine looks at those documents to typically, at minimum 20 documents, ideally more like 50, 50. And it learns from that and says, okay, now I got it. And now you can feed it new stuff. And keep in mind, I'm saying documents, but they're really content items. Think of all these little scroll items that you see here in the graphic. This could be a Slack post. This could be an email. This could be a record in an AMS or a card in Salesforce. This could be an HTML page, which is kind of what I was implying before, or a PDF. But it doesn't have to be those things. A content item, air quotes, can be a lot of things. And again, think back to challenging you, and before I was picking on you, Lori, saying you had 1 to 4 knowledge bases. When you're looking at this, think about if maybe there are some more knowledge bases that can be included in this list. It may just be a sample line, a post from something that somebody left somewhere, a comment. And it could get pulled into this, and then the engine can recognize, hey, this could be a helpful tidbit of information for somebody to act on. And to John, your earlier point about how long it can take, if you're doing a reorganization and you're migrating data to a different system, you're right. You're thinking more along the lines of year or years, multiples of months at least. With something like this, you don't have to kitchen sink it at the beginning. You can start, so maybe you'll have 50 terms or phrases that are meaningful to you, your membership, your staff, and you would go through this learning process with those documents. And then you iterate. I always hate to use it as an example because their budget is insane, but think of Amazon.com. Like, can you think of the last time that website was redesigned? You can't, because it's just been improved iteratively over time. Now, if you went back to like the Wayback Machine and look at Amazon from 10 years ago, it looks totally different, but you never really noticed because it was just all these little incremental changes over time. And it is what it is today. And that's how the AI works too. So it starts off maybe a little rough around the edges. You're doing some searches, it's pulling in some things, but it learns and it gets smarter. And over time, let's say 12, 18 months, you look back, you're like, wow, I don't know how we were doing this without it before.
And it's going to say, good morning. I know what you need.
Yes,
today,
exactly.
Right? And you're like, oh my God, stop it. It's
your socks don't match.
Exactly,
Yeah, right.
exactly. So, all right. So for something like this, because I think, I'm just grabbing on your word iterative. So I'm guessing that maybe you mean for that, like you said, it can sort of start out with what you give it, but it gets better as it learns. So optimally, like when we're all, at least for me, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I never have to figure out where to store another document again. To get to that point where we sort of know what it is, like what do you guys sort of estimate? What's the transition and sort of what it would take an organization to get to the point where you can really get great, meaningful results from these searches, like when it's learned enough? Like if I'm diligent and I do your 50 documents per top, whatever, like what do you typically say to people? Like it takes AI to learn, which is kind of scary as I'm even asking the question, how long does it take AI to learn what I want? That's weird, but
I always conservatively say that, out of the box, it's 80% there, John. So like even when you first start using it that first day, you're like, oh, this is pretty good. But invariably, someone who's the subject matter expert in your organization or someone who's very senior is going to look for something. And it's going to be that 20% where that refinement isn't there. And again, it's an iterative process, and that's just part of the educating. So for different organizations, it varies. They may say, hey, this is great. 80%, this is night and day from where we were before. For other groups, they may say, hey, we still need to put some time into this, because the tech part, again, air quotes, that part's kind of easy. We're connecting this system to that one, you're doing this to that, you're applying the AI engine over here and you're reading it. It's that elbow grease though, that going back and validating results, teaching the engine, that can take an infinite amount of time. It's as much time as someone's able to contribute to the process, and it's only going to be better. It's like if your doctor, if you had to have your hip replaced or something, the doctor says, I need to go to rehab, you got to go twice a week, blah, blah, blah. If you skip the rehab, it's probably still going to be okay. Yeah, you know, like you'll still be able to use your hip, it's still going to be a little bit sore, but it's not going to be as good as it would have been if you had been disciplined and stuck with it and kept making those iterative updates.
You know, it's funny you use that analogy. I had a friend who had a hip replacement on one side 15 years ago, and it cost him a fortune. And he just got the other side done, and it cost him very little money. And AI is kind of like that now too. If you kind of checked into it 10 years ago, you'd be like, oh no, this is way too much money for me. But now I'm talking to a lot of organizations that are fairly small who find it very affordable from the software perspective. When they look at what the effort would be to actually go in and tag all the data that they have going back 20, 30 years, it's an impossible task. But if they could buy this software and put the AI engine on it, they now see that it's very affordable. And like Adam said, it's 80% good coming out of the box.
Well, and also the other thing when you guys are talking, I'm thinking, just like we've learned about how much time and productivity or more productivity we have when we're not commuting anymore with some of our workforces being hybrid. If you take a day a week looking for information, imagine the cost savings and how much more work you get when it's not just about looking for information, right? So, I mean, that's a lot of time. That's equal to, if we go to the 20% from that survey, everybody giving one more day a week to the organization they work with or to the work that they want to do, right?
That's right, John.
I wanted to bring up AI transcription as well. Because we
actually, Johnny, that's a good point. If I can interrupt you, let's go to the next slide and just show a quick example of some of this in action so that you can see that, because I know that this came up earlier when we were talking about the benefits of using Zoom. So finish your thought, Johnny, while I'm pulling that up.
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of organizations are having these internal meetings, just like we're having this webinar now, and we're recording it. But inside of this webinar, you can look at the title, you can look at the description, but we've covered a number of topics in here that aren't described in the title and the description of the webinar. And it would be impossible for you to find any of those things that we've covered here just from looking at that title and description.
That's right. Yeah, it's when I'm all of these meetings, and this again could be perceived as another benefit of having these sessions. And I know, Julie, we're getting close on time, so we'll work to wrap this up. But you have all of this data that's been collected, all of these meetings, and this is also where AI can help you. And it can look at the recordings. It could be a podcast, it could be a video file of the session, and it can actually transcribe what is happening in the audio. And so this is an example up here. I just did a search for COVID. And this is an example of, you may be looking for something like parasites, and it may not appear at all in the description here, in the abstract and the title, but it's talked about in the media itself, in the podcast or in the video recording. And so an AI engine can help you. And again, what I mentioned before about medical terminology and academia and science, you have to use different libraries to really maximize the transcriptions to make them good, but you also have to train the transcriptions. So if there's terminology that isn't picked up in the transcriptions, you run maybe 100 transcriptions first, and then an actual human needs to go through and read the transcriptions and be like, well, that's not right, and teach the engine, hey, when someone says IRs, this is what it is. It's capital I, capital R, lowercase s. And this is how it should show up in the transcription. You have to train the engine. So now when you add future media in, it knows what to do and it transcribes it properly. Another example we were talking about before, like this is an organization that this is Higher Logic and this is Slack being searched. So someone's doing a search for, again, I did a search for COVID, and they're finding information like here are Slack messages that have where this has been discussed. But then here are also messages in our Higher Logic community where we've discussed this same issue. And could that be a useful knowledge base for an organization? I think so. And again, history repeating itself. Hey, maybe this has been discussed someplace, either internally or externally, that could help us answer this question. But a final point I want to make is, and you heard me mention this before, is about that elbow grease concept. And this is really cool stuff, using the software and using these tools to help your organization and help you drive you toward having more efficient and meaningful meetings. But it's got to start somewhere. And typically it starts with some sort of strategic discussion or assessment. And I can't underestimate the amount of times where I've attended a meeting where the organization is maybe looking for that silver bullet solution. And they want to hire a company or hire a vendor to, hey, just take care of it for us. There, at least half of the successful projects that I've been involved with have champions on the inside, folks who are invested in making the project successful and are willing to put the work in to make it successful. And that's part of, I think, like a solid assessment process, John.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, when we start working with groups, one of the two big areas we talk about is your ability to find and access information, like sort of how long does it take? Do you find what you need? And it's also about meetings, right? So meetings, what are your meetings like? You know, how can they be more effective? How many are you in, et cetera? So marrying the two like that, and finding out how an organization's, what their temperature is for both those things. But I have to say, when you're going through that and you're showing those results on the page, all I can imagine is all these smarty pants that now show up at a meeting and say, well, you know, that's really interesting, but in 1987, we wrote literally in this document, you know, blah, blah, blah. I can really see people throwing that stuff up, but I think again,
I answered this in Slack like 2
yeah,
years
exactly.
ago.
I mean, I'm looking at the conversation you had 3 years ago, and that's not your position, right? So, whoa, look out, AI. No, I think what for me is fascinating again is, again, the amount of time we're spending looking for information for stuff, the amount of meetings that we have just to gather information. And I think what you said earlier was just so spot on. We've talked about this before, right? And maybe it was a year ago and nobody remembers, and yet we're talking about it again. But imagine if we could sort of, you know, go through that. So I know we're getting still on time, but we do want to open that up for any questions that we might have. If you all want to put that in Slack, and I know that somebody did that. Oh, yeah,
not
put it
Slack.
in chat. That's what I meant. It's not Slack, chat. Sorry about that.
Well,
John's used to Slack because at Achurch you're a big slacker. So
yeah,
yes,
exactly.
that's right.
So
don't be a slacker.
Yeah,
and we hope there's been some good tidbits here that have at least got the wheels turning about ways that maybe you could be using some of your knowledge base that's available to you to maybe help you with your future meetings.
No.
So
well, I'm excited for the world where we no longer have to worry about all our directories and naming conventions, because we spend a ton of time on that with organizations, and it is a laborious process, and so critical. Again, the remote workforce, it's not that we shouldn't have had great accessible files well named in the first place, but when people are in a distributed environment, it just magnifies the issue. And so I think that as this, hopefully technology becomes more accessible for organizations, I mean, to be able to clear that out and not have to worry about that anymore, I think that would be awesome. I think that would be a great tool.
And John, a big part of it too is about compromise. So for those organizations, it's like, oh, we have to do it manually. We have to do it specifically. I got to go through these 1,200 PDFs, and I've got to tag them in this SQL database and do it this way. I get that, and I understand wanting that level of control. We appreciate that. On the other hand, so much of this is about compromising. And if you can use some software to help you get, as I said, 80% there, and maybe your surveys, Julie has her survey up here, maybe your surveys from their membership or from the staff tell you, hey, this is effective, we're happy. Your analytics are showing people are finding things. Maybe you have other metrics. I call it your toast test. Well, what are you going to toast the champagne glasses to that you've done a good job? Maybe your toast test tells you, hey, less calls into our member services center, or less help desk tickets, or whatever it may be. If you see some percentage drops of that after implementing some sort of knowledge-based system, then it means that you're going in the right direction. It's not going to be a 100% solution. I thought by having this knowledge base, or I thought it was going to make us have more meaningful meetings. It doesn't mean you're not going to have meetings anymore, and that you're still not going to get questions from members, right? It just means that maybe you'll be that much more efficient in dealing with them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate it. I know we took up the full hour. Thank you everybody for joining us. Just a quick 2 takeaways. Number one, you can see there the State of the Association Workplace. We've got results coming up, a webinar on that on October 19th. And also you will get the meaningful meeting mindset flowchart when Julie sends out the thank you email from this. So thank you all again, Adam, John.
Thank you, everybody.
Guys. We really appreciate
Thank you guys
Awesome
for
stuff.
joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you
Thanks for
all.
joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks, Julie.